Welcome to Talk Branding to Me, the podcast for women building intentional businesses and brands rooted in strategy, not just aesthetics.
Branding doesn't have to feel overwhelming. It's more than design. It's how strategy and style come together to create an identity, build trust, and stand out.
We're your hosts, Jamie Wright of Embellished Brands
and Jessie Ford of Untethered Design Studio.
We're brand strategists, designers, and friends who turned our coffee chats into honest conversations about branding done right
and wrong.
If you're feeling stuck or unsure about your brand, you're in the right place.
And now, let's talk branding.
Hello and welcome back to Talk Branding to Me. I am your co-host, Jamie, here with Jessie. Today, we are exploring when it's time to build a personal brand. Personal branding is a hot topic these days, so of course, we wanted to make sure that we talked about it on this podcast. But before we dive into answering the question, let's talk about something else, which I think will help us figure out when it's time to build a personal brand. And that is the phases that your business brand might go through. And once we understand what those phases look like, that could help you better understand when it might be appropriate to build out your personal brand from your business brand. Let's just cover that, and then we'll get into the meat of the conversation. Jessie and I feel that there are three main phases that your brand, your business brand, will go through. And actually, this is true no matter what kind of brand it is. But for the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to focus it on from the perspective of being a business brand. Usually there is that startup phase. So it's brand new. And in the case of a business brand, there is usually a lot of personal influence from the founder that helps set the stage for what this initial business brand looks like. Then once the business is more established, so maybe a year to 4 years, give or take, every business is a little different in how fast it progresses through these phases. But for an established business, we're really kind of seeing a point where they're moving away from having a lot of that personal influence that initially was there at the beginning of the brand. And the business brand itself is moving into a standalone brand. They've tried some things, figured out what works, what doesn't work. They're getting feedback from their target audience, and they're starting to make specific brand decisions that are for the business itself, not necessarily because that's what the founder or CEO likes or dislikes. And then this third phase is an experienced brand. So we have startup, established, and then experience. So roughly, this might be year 4, year 5, and beyond, where this brand has some staying power. It's not really going anywhere. And it's evolved a bit where now the business brand is pretty much standing on its own feet. And it doesn't really have that personal influence anymore of the founder. It's truly an independent brand that has staying power, connects really well with its audience, and so on and so forth. From there, once we kind of understand where, for our listeners as business owners, where you're building a brand, and based on our experience, it's probably going to be a business brand, then you inevitably might get to a point where you are thinking about building out your personal brand and wondering how that works with the business brand and so on and so forth. And that's what we want to talk to you about today. So, Jessie, do you want to tell our listeners about the personal brand side of things and what we think about that?
Sure. How do we really define a personal brand? And I think I've gotten that question from clients. How do I know when I need a personal brand, when I need a business brand? Are they the same thing? What is different? What is the crossover? I kind of define a personal brand as a professional brand. It's just the professional brand of the individual, right? So you might be that founder, that owner of a business, of multiple business ventures, but this comes back to positioning yourself as a standalone expert, thought leader, etc., opening yourself up to other opportunities, maybe building other businesses, pursuing, other avenues. So personal branding really focuses on building a professional brand around the individual, kind of separate from the business that they maybe started off creating. And a lot of times early on, speaking back to these phases, startup, even established, we're we're experienced businesses, but we're kind of one woman shops and solopreneurs. The business is us, and we are kind of the business. And I think it's probably helpful for our listeners to think of this even like on a corporate level of, think of someone who created what's now a really large global, brand or business. You probably don't even necessarily know who the owner or founder was. You just know that business brand, right? Like you just know Starbucks by itself, Target by itself, but there was an individual or a team of individuals that created that brand years and years ago. I think even looking at it from a corporate standpoint or even kind of a small business standpoint like us, the same principles apply because there just comes a point in time when not necessarily that you outgrow your business or you're bigger and better than your business, but you might want to keep the business. You might do something different with it one day, but you still want to separate and differentiate yourself, kind of isolate yourself like in a good way outside of the business so that people become familiar with you and know who you are outside of just having the attachment to the business. Do you look at it the same way? Does that make sense?
I do, but I will say, I think branding can be a really complex subject. And then when we are thinking about the essence of these brands for businesses versus people, they're all very nuanced. And so I have had to sit with these similar questions that our listeners might be having about what is a personal brand? What does it look like? How is it the same or different from this business brand or corporate brand that I've been building? What goals do I have for the business, but also what goals do I have for myself personally as a professional in the industry? So if you're listening and you're just like, gosh, this subject just feels really big, or I just feel like I have more questions than answers. I just want to encourage you and say, you're not alone. We
Mhm.
even have the same thoughts and feelings and questions too, but it is something that we're hoping our conversation today can help you get some insight on how to maybe start separating how you think about a personal brand versus the business brand that you've been involved with for so long. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. And I think it's really important to talk about when you know it's the right time or the proper time. Is there a right
of
or wrong
course,
time? Can you do it anytime? Do you do it further down the road when you're more established? Do some people do it early on because they want to be known outside of their business, even in within the first year or two, and they want to be again available and open to do, other things and pursue other ventures. There does usually come a time when, you sort of need to cultivate that separation between the business brand and the personal brand so that you're not so attached to it and so that you're known, outside of it. So I think a lot of times it might coincide with the current phase of just the business brand itself. So what you just talked about, right? Like startup early on, you are probably all in, you're in the trenches, you're building the business brand. People might not necessarily know you as the individual. They might know you with some team members, especially in a startup type of environment. I think something like techie related, that sort of comes to mind since there are a lot of those, but you're not necessarily known separately or individually. When you're established, to your point, you're kind of moving away from the personal influence, leaning more into the standalone brand. That might be kind of a good time because you're a few years in. You are wanting to have a little bit of that separation, maybe wanting to do other things. And again, the experience, it's, hey, that business brand is a well oiled machine at this point. It's kind of running on its own. It doesn't necessarily have to be associated with certain people or names. Like the brand is just the brand and it's known, regionally, nationally, globally, whatever. So I think
hmm
it just depends on where you're at, what you're comfortable doing. I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer necessarily. It just depends on how fast that business grows and scales, when you think it's necessary to step away from maybe some certain roles within the business and again, do other things. I think it also kind of depends on maybe wanting to stand out as the subject matter expert rather than just being the CEO of the business brand. So, something that comes to mind for me is, and I've had clients do this, they'll say, I still want to be part of my business. That's still mine and something I created, but I want to be available to speak at events. I want to create a podcast like we're doing. I want to write a book. I want to hold conferences or trainings, just in the professional space. I think individuals, especially once they've established a business or multiple businesses, they are in a really good spot to be seen more as maybe a thought leader, an expert just at what they do in business, rather than solely and only being tied to any business brands that they created. That's a really good spot, I think, to be in because you're able to be positioned as the individual expert and really just a business expert in general. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the type of business that
Yeah.
that you've built and grown.
If I could jump in and offer
Sure.
just a practical example, I think this might help our listeners a little bit. If you think about the TV show Shark Tank and
Mhm.
the people they have on there as the sharks, you recognize their faces, the names, and you probably know a little bit about them, other businesses they have started. But that I think is a really great example of how they have established their personal, professional brands
Mhm.
separate from these businesses that maybe where they got their start back in the day, or just even the many businesses that they've helped grow over time. And to your point, Jesse, they are known as being experts in their particular fields. So that is why they are on the show. They might choose to invest in business ideas that are related to their area of expertise, but we know of them by their names and we know of
Mhm.
them by their past achievements, which include building other brands. And
Mhm.
so I don't know if that helps, but for me, it helps me in my brain going, okay, you can be a part of a lot of brands, or maybe they went all in on a singular brand in their earlier days, and then they eventually moved on from that. But now you might throw out a name of one of those sharks to me, and I go,
Mhm.
yes. And I can think of different projects that I know that they've been a part of, but I
Mhm.
know that because of their personal brand and not
Mhm.
because of maybe a singular business brand that they were affiliated with at
Yeah.
some point. So
Yeah.
I hope that helps. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that example. I know I have the few that, come to my mind, and they're individual podcasts that I listen to, like TED Talks or speeches or certain speaking engagements that they have, you know, had or been a part of that I've seen online. And it's so funny, as large as they are in the business space, I can't even offhand go, yeah, they started and created this business, that business. Like, I know who is associated with a few different brands, but it's more of like I know them as just the individual and that
Mhm.
they're someone who's super successful and accomplished. And again, to your point, a lot of that comes from not just creating one business, that's being involved in multiple ventures. So I think that leads us to a good next thought, which is maybe thinking about and considering your future goals. So bringing it back to maybe a place where a lot of our small business listeners and people like us might be kind of thinking on this a bit. Hey, I've been in this business for a while. Hey, I'm wanting to be involved in some other things or whatever. I'm going to go ahead and take that leap and sort of establish more of a personal brand, not so connected to my business, but why would I do that? Thinking about the purpose behind it. What is the goal? Like with anything at the end of the day, not just doing something to do
Mhm.
it, but having a good reason behind it. And I think in this situation, it can depend on how much you want to grow the team. If you want to still own a business, but somebody else manages it, you see that everywhere. Lots of businesses that are still owned by certain individuals, but they're managed by other people and teams of people.
And they're no longer the face of that brand.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think you can also think about, is there that possibility of selling this business one day? I mean, that's a big one that comes to my mind. I actually had a client, I remember, gosh, probably 5 or 6 years ago. We created her branding, launched a website, much like us. She was an individual female entrepreneur, and I believe she did a lot of content creation and copywriting, if I remember correctly. I touched base with her a year or two later, and surprisingly, she told me she had sold the business. Someone had come along. I don't know if they just wanted to do the same thing. They liked the client base she had. They saw what she was doing and they wanted to be a part of it. And there was just an opportunity there and a door that opened for her to let it go. And I think that's great because maybe we don't always consider that. I mean, ever think about you pour so much, your heart and soul into your business and it's like your baby. But think about everyone else in the world who has gotten to that point of, okay, I did it and it's okay to let it go and let it be grown by someone else or evolve into something else. And then I'm going to go do other things. So, might you sell that business one day? Might you continue to own it forever, but you don't need to necessarily be in total control and the face that's seen everywhere and the voice that's heard everywhere. It's opportunities and places like that where I think you have the chance to kind of separate and go ahead and form that personal brand because it opens you up to other things.
Mhm. Mhm. I agree. And I would even jump in and offer another consideration where we've all heard the phrase, "It's who you know," right? And
Yes.
even, you don't do business with businesses, you do business with people, like,
Mhm.
there's a ton of sayings along that same vein. And so I think a consideration would be maybe what industry you might be in, the
Mhm.
type of offerings you have, whether is it service-based where the one-to-one connection, the human connection is really important to be successful. That might be where
Mhm.
you decide to lean into some type of personal brand, but it may not be as important if you're a products-based business or something to that effect. So thinking about what industry you're in and what your offerings are, as well as maybe just even the culture surrounding what you do. I don't know about you, Jesse, but I've been hearing a lot lately about trust economy. We've even heard in the past
Mm.
that phrase, no like trust. There's this
Yeah.
no like trust factor. People have to know you as an individual in order to decide they can connect, and then maybe they'll consider doing business with you, right? So we've heard
Mhm.
a lot of things about being individuals. I would say for our listeners, if they're at this point of maybe confusion or maybe just mere contemplation, if you were trying to figure out if it's time to build a personal brand, maybe consider where you're at currently, the industry and other factors, but how important is it to connect one-on-one, or maybe not even one-on-one, but just how important is it to connect on that human level
Mhm.
where instead of existing behind the veil of a corporate or business brand, if it's more important for you to show up as the human and the individual than it is to show up as the position of the brand that you're leading, that might be another indication that it's time to build out
Mhm.
your personal brand away from the business brand that you've been working
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, I love that. Building a personal brand really allows you to just build trust and build
Yes.
better and stronger trust with an audience
Hmm.
because they just come to know you, and I know we have another episode where we are talking about authenticity and feeling credible and genuine. People are more likely to connect with us when we're our real selves and being authentic, right? And, just puts us in a better spot to be able to build trust. And once we
Hmm.
have someone's trust, right, we have everything. We can move forward in a positive way in working together and in building something together. But people invest in people that they trust. And creating a personal brand really allows you to, I think, escalate that part of the process a little bit easier and quicker. Maybe it makes sense even earlier on to build a personal brand or to build a personal brand simultaneously with your business brands. I mean, that's kind of always an option too. So the
Hmm.
point being, I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer. There are a lot of different ways to build a personal brand. Well, with that, Jamie, I think that we are nearing the end of this episode. And as always, it's been a great conversation with you today. Let's go ahead and wrap things up the way that we normally do with our segment, Talk Branding to Me. So go ahead, Jamie, and talk branding to me.
Jesse, unbeknownst to you, you actually gave me a really great segue into this segment. So you were just talking about trust and authenticity. And today I wanted to actually talk about subcontractors and vendors, which probably seems really, really random, but I can link them together. So I'm coming from a hospitality background as I'm thinking about this. And hospitality is very much about service and experience. And we have debates on, is the customer truly always right? Or do we just still give them a high level of service just because they're the customer and they deserve it, right? So everyone has
Hmm.
different opinions on that. Depending on the industry you're in, you might approach it in different ways. But that just for our listeners, the mindset that I have when I think about service and working with others to provide something for a customer or a client. A big piece oftentimes for especially for small business owners in the process of trying to serve a client, you might need to bring in other people, whether it's individuals, subcontractors, or maybe it's other companies, so they might be vendors. When you do that, sometimes that requires you letting go of some control. I don't mean that in a bad way, but when you let go of some control, it basically means you are depending on the people you're bringing in to represent your brand. So you don't have control over them like you might maybe with an employee, a W-2 employee. So,
Mhm.
there's some give and take there. But essentially, where my brain is going with this today is the people that you bring in to help provide a service or a product to your customer base or even just to your audience at large. They may not be paying customers, but if anyone is representing your brand, do your due diligence to make sure that you are bringing either a person or a third party company in that you've vetted that will help you provide a seamless brand experience
Mhm.
for whoever it is that you're serving. This is a hot button for me because again, coming from a hospitality background where service is very much a big deal, I am highly critical of customer service experiences that I have experienced, or even when I have others tell me stories and I will lose my mind. Just take me out to coffee and I will let you know how I feel about that. But all of that to say, as part of my work in branding, my brain also considers, okay, as we are building out this brand strategy or as we are, who is your target audience? What are we trying to do? What needs do they have? How do we want to connect with them? I will also try to consider how the service aspect, the customer service component fits into that picture because you might say, we have these core values, this is how we do things here, but then you bring in other people or maybe you outsource or whatever the scenario might look like, but they don't have as much commitment to your brand as you do. And so maybe you
Mhm.
sacrifice a little bit of the quality or you sacrifice maybe just knowledge. They aren't as knowledgeable about your brand or
Mhm.
they don't care as much about your core values. Maybe they don't even know your core values. So they don't know that you want to provide and do things in a certain way. We're just talking about like branding and authenticity and trust. Oftentimes, my observation has been is when brands start growing, when you start adding more people to the team or subcontractors or third party vendors, take that as an opportunity to really consider how those changes to your processes or to the service, how that could possibly impact your brand. Is it going to be
Mhm.
a good thing over time, or is it going to create issues with your brand that you're going to have to come back and address from a customer service standpoint or whatever it might impact?
Mhm.
That is my soapbox for today. In considering your brand, consider also who is affiliated with it, whether they're in house or not, and figure out a way to get them to buy in and have ownership over your
Mhm.
brand as well as a service provider representing your brand. Look for where you might have some gaps in that brand experience and try to figure out how to create a seamless brand experience through all of that. So I hope I hope that was clear.
Yeah, I
I was
love
trying to not
that.
get too hot under the collar about this because I get fired up about it. Sometimes brands just they lose sight of that. They're like, "Oh, it'll be so efficient. Let's just bring in this software, this
Mhm.
AI software and let it just automate everything or let's just whatever." All
Mhm.
of those decisions, while they might seem like a great idea or they might seem really efficient, think through the process and the impact on your target audience and work backwards and just make sure that that is supporting your brand and
Mhm.
not detracting from it at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's important to keep in mind, just to add another thought here, that anyone associated with your brand is an ambassador of
Yes, I
it,
love that word. Yes, brand ambassador.
right? Every individual, every team member, they are a reflection of you. So it's important to just connect with and find people when you're hiring that share your same values, that believe in what your brand is doing, that basically serve as just extensions of your team that are natural, organic. It makes sense. If an email comes from them, if they're sitting in on a meeting, if they're speaking and saying something or they're writing something, that it's consistent and cohesive with just the brand itself. And it doesn't matter who it's coming from because you're all team players and all working towards the same goal and making the same effort. And like you said, you're vested in it, and you feel that ownership. And I think that's super, super important. So that's such a great talk branding to me, Jamie. I love that. Well, with that, I think we are going to wrap up today's episode. So thanks so much for listening. And we will be back again soon with another episode of Talk Branding to Me. We'll see you guys later. Thanks for listening to Talk Branding to Me. If today's conversation sparked a new way of thinking about your brand, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with a fellow business owner who's ready to think deeper about branding and have fun with it too.
For more branding insights, behind-the-scenes conversations, and resources to support your brand journey, connect with us at Embellish Brands and at Untethered Design on social media.
Don't forget, branding is more than just aesthetics. It's both strategy and style.
Until next time, remember, you're fully capable of building a brand you're proud of, and we're here cheering you on every step of the way.